All right, here we go. We're talking about summer on this evening's weather for Weather Geeks on this Thursday evening. The weather very quiet in the short term, so let's take this opportunity to talk about June, July, and August, or, of course, meteorological summer. Here's a look at our most recent summers. Temperature-wise, we've had several pretty warm summers in a row. In fact, 6 in a row officially. In 2017 was just about average, and 2016 was a warm summer. So, for all intents and purposes, it's really been since the 3 in a row cool summers we had in 13, 14, and 15, since we've had any sort of, by any meaningful margin, a cool summer. It's been really since 2013, 14, and 15. Will that trend change this year? Just might. We'll talk about the forecast, of course, momentarily. Now, precipitation-wise, the wet summers have outnumbered the dry summers of late, but last year was a dry summer. We were in an abnormally dry designation in a lot of our area for a good chunk of July and August. At the airport, we only had 7.71 inches of rain in June, July, and August. Compare that to 2021 when we had over 20 inches worth of rain. But again, last year was kind of an anomaly. The wet summers have outnumbered the dry summers of late. All right, so in this video, we're going to talk about El Nino primarily. On my weather blog, ericwfmj.com, we'll get into a little more detail this evening on some of the pattern drivers this summer aside from El Nino, but the main one is going to be El Nino. If you're not familiar with how this works, we've actually been in the opposite of this state for the last 3 years. We've been in La Nina, but this is basically dealing with the Pacific Ocean, and specifically right around the equator in the Pacific Ocean, and trade winds normally blow the warmest waters westward towards Asia, away from South America. And when they're especially strong, you get really chilly water out here, and that's when you have La Nina. Well, when the trade winds reverse and head the other direction, that warm water can slosh back eastward, and this is El Nino. And, again, sometimes I'm asked, so what? What does warm or cold water in the Pacific Ocean in just this narrow stripe have to do with our weather? Well, the ocean and the atmosphere are closely linked up, and changes in water temperatures across the oceans, and especially in this part of the Pacific, can influence the jet stream. That's part of the atmosphere, and that can influence how our sensible day-to-day weather turns out on a weekly, monthly, and even seasonal scale. So again, when the trade winds blow this way, it blows the warm water this way, and this El Nino is turning out to be a pretty strong one, and it's coming on fast. It's not very often we've gone from a pretty stout La Nina to a pretty stout El Nino in this short amount of time. There's not a big sample size in the historical record for this exact scenario. Of course, we've had lots of El Ninos, but they don't often come on so fast and so strong after a pretty strong La Nina event, which we had over the last couple of years. So a little bit of an unusual situation, but here's how we think things will shake out. The most likely outcome for us, as far as the summer season, June, July, and August, the most likely outcome is that it's a cooler than average summer. That would be in contrast to many of our recent summers. The second most likely outcome is near average, and here's the definitions we're using: +1 to -1, and then coolers -1 to -3. We think those are the most likely outcomes. The least likely outcomes are a really stinking hot summer and a really historically chilly summer. We don't think either of those is likely, but by some margin, probably between 1 and 3 degrees, it's likely to be a cooler than average summer. And if that forecast were to verify, it's been since about 2014, 2015 since we've had a summer like that. Why is the forecast the way it is? We'll get into that some on my blog this evening, but just a real simplified explanation is El Nino, especially if it's strong or moderately strong, tends to favor cooler air making more inroads into our parts of the country during the summer. Now, of course, it's the warm weather season. That doesn't mean it's going to be a cold summer. We're not going to be flipping on the furnace in July, things like that. Everything here is relative to the average. There's going to be plenty of hot days this summer, as there are every summer, but compared to the average, it's likely to come out in the wash as a little bit cooler than the average. The most likely outcome in terms of rainfall is that it is a somewhat drier than average summer. And this goes along with the idea that El Nino is coming on. It's coming on pretty fast. And more often than not, when we have an El Nino summer, going along with some of the other factors, again, that I'll get into more in the written version of this forecast, when you have those things acting in concert, it tends to favor drier than average conditions across our area, eastern Ohio and western PA. The second most likely outcome is a near average summer. It's not likely to be excessively wet, And it's a little more likely on the other end that it's very dry. That's still a low chance, but it's more likely to be very dry than it is very wet this summer. Unless something weird were to happen, if we were to have some sort of freak event like a post-tropical system, used to be a hurricane, made landfall, and then it just crawls through our area and dumps a bunch of rain. If that were to occur, it could screw up the forecast a little bit. But other than that kind of freak kind of event, that's the way it looks precipitation-wise. Could be a little bit on the dry side. We're already, of course, pretty dry here in late May. In terms of temperature extremes, here's a look at the 90-degree day history in recent years. We've had anywhere from 0 to 18. In that coolish summer back in 2014, we didn't have a single 90-degree day. But our 30-year average, we average about 8 90-degree days. The most back in the Dust Bowl years in the 30s and even into 1943. We had 40 a couple of those years. But we haven't had nearly that many ever since then. And again, in most recent times, 2018 is where we topped out. What about this year? If our average is 8, I would say we'll probably see between 2 and 5 90-degree temperatures this summer. We might even have our first one next week. We're going to flirt with 90 a couple of times next week, specifically Thursday into Friday. But I would look for a below average year in terms of 90-degree temperatures and high heat. Again, I have yet to write it up, but I'll get it online this evening after I post this video, a written version of the forecast. If you're really interested in more detail, some of the meteorology, some of the other things we're looking at other than El Nino when we come up with this kind of seasonal forecast, check that out this evening on ericwfmj.com. I'll link to it on all my social media. All right, so let's get to the forecast for the short term, now that we've covered the long term. Across the country this evening, our eye is drawn to a couple of features. A little severe weather threat in western Texas. Here's our upper low off the coast of Florida that will give parts of the southern U.S. a crummy holiday weekend coming up. Closer to home, another chilly night for tonight. We have no frost advisories here, across our TV viewing area, but as nearby as Crawford County and Erie County, PA, there are frost advisories up. Now, in northern Trumbull, northern and eastern Mercer, could someone see a 36-degree reading, 35 tomorrow morning, and maybe a little light frost? That's possible. I don't think it's a widespread thing. I don't think it's that big of a deal. And for most of our viewing area, I would not, encourage you to spend a lot of time worrying about hanging baskets and covering plants and that sort of thing for tonight, because much like last night, we'll probably stop on average at about 38, 39, 40. That's just a little bit too warm for any sort of widespread problematic frost. What a picture-perfect day we have coming up Friday with wall-to-wall sunshine. We'll get back to the more seasonable lower 70s in the afternoon. As we head into the weekend, that southern U.S. system on Saturday gives a rainy and chilly day to Charleston, Myrtle Beach, Outer Banks, Wilmington, Raleigh, Charlotte, places like that. For us, though, just a veil of high clouds filtering in Saturday afternoon, and we'll call it partly sunny Sunday. Won't be perfectly sunny on Sunday, but still a fine day to get outdoors. I think the rain stays off to our south right into Monday, and the warm-up continues. So by Monday, Memorial Day, we are expecting highs in the mid-80s, and again, I think we're going to be in the upper 80s to maybe near 90 during the second half of next week. Recent Memorial Days have not been very wet. In fact, we haven't had an appreciable amount of rain on Memorial Day in about a decade, believe it or not. We've gotten pretty lucky on Memorial Day. We had a trace back in 2019. It was pretty hot last year, and it was really hot back in 2018. In fact, 2018, the hottest Memorial Day on record for our area, with a high of 92. Won't be that extreme on Memorial Day this year. We're expecting mid-80s on Monday, but again, maybe flirting with 90 later in the week, and not a drop of rain in the forecast for the rest of May. It may be at the very end of next week and into next weekend before we have any shower and thunderstorm chances. I think a cool down will also commence as we go towards next weekend into the following week, the second week of June. All right, that's it for me tonight. Again, look for the updated summer forecast on my weather blog this evening and on social media. Have a great rest of your Thursday night and enjoy a beautiful Friday.